The Bobby O Show.
Welcome to the Bobby O Show. My name is Bob Opotzner, and I have a show today that is very important to me and to my guests, and I hope you will find it both interesting and significant in our society. I'm wearing a shirt that will give you a hint as to the topic that we'll be talking about. This is a shirt that I received called Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence. I am not a teacher, but I spent 15 years on the Board of Education in two different communities, Shelton originally when I was a younger kid, and also Richfield, Connecticut. My daughter's a current teacher as well at this point in time. So I just think that I have enough of a nexus to the cause. I think it's a very important cause. The issue of preventing gun violence or gun violence prevention is a critical issue in our society. Many of us, most of us, have been involved either directly or indirectly. Our guest more so than most, unfortunately. And we know how important this is as an issue. I scratch my head. I cannot figure out for the life of me why it is that we have not advanced further to protect our children and ourselves and our society. And I put blame on one political party, the Republican Party. But we'll get into that in a little more detail. But I want to introduce my guest, Tara Donnelly. Tara, welcome to the show. And so thank you very much for coming onto the show.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Tara, would you just briefly, before we get to the main topic, tell us about who you are a little bit and whatever you want to tell us about what you do, your family, whatever you want to tell us, please tell us.
Sure. My name is Tara Donnelly. I live here in Connecticut. I'm mother of two, and unfortunately, like so many Americans, I have been impacted by gun violence. In 2005, both of my parents, Tim and Kim Donnelly, were killed in our family jewelry store when it was robbed by a young man who stole an unsecured gun and later used that gun to rob the store, and my parents lost their lives that day.
And by the way, I want to thank and give a shout out to Abby Clements, who introduced Tara and me and brought her to the show. And I want to thank her very much. Abby's the organizer and is on a sabbatical supporting this organization, Teachers Unified to End Gun Violence.
Founding the organization.
Right, she did. And she's executive director. Candy Ann, would you please put the picture of her parents and her family, those few pictures we have? That's mom and dad, correct?
That is, yes.
What are their names, please?
Tim and Kim.
Donnelly?
Tim and Kim Donnelly, yes.
And this is pictures of mom and dad. And is that your brother behind you?
Correct. That's my brother, Eric, and myself.
Okay. And that was taken about how long before the incident or the tragedy?
I think that picture might be 3 years prior, 3 or 4 years prior.
Okay. And the tragedy happened in 2005. Had you just gotten out of college at that point in time?
Correct. Yes. I had just graduated college.
From?
Fairfield University.
You're about 21 or 22 at the point in time?
Yes. And I had just moved out of their home to my first apartment in New York City. I had moved out about October, and this happened on February 2nd.
Oh, wow, that's terrible. Tell me about the family business you mentioned.
We had a family jewelry store. It was in the family. My father opened the first store. I think before I was born. The initial store was in New Haven, Connecticut, and then they opened a second store in Fairfield, Connecticut, sometime around 1987. They closed the New Haven location, and then in the early 90s, moved the Fairfield location to the Post Road in Fairfield, which was, a busy downtown location. They were very excited to be there. They were so excited to be a part of the community. I think they absolutely loved what they did in the sense that they got to know people. People when you think about it, you go into a jewelry store, you're usually going in for a good reason. You're looking for a gift, or you're commemorating something you're very excited about. So they both got to be a part of positive times in people's lives, and they truly valued that. And again, people would come in as customers and leave as friends. It was it was very much so a family store, a true mom and pop shop.
My family had a bakery business from 1907 to 1974 in Shelton, Connecticut. And I was, of course, worked there until I went to college. But that bakery business, this facility, was like a second home to me.
Mm-hmm.
And our mail went there. Our family met there. Got my college admissions ticket letter there. Were you involved in your family business also in Fairfield?
Yeah, I was. Before I was old enough to work, I was there, wrapping gifts at Christmas time, or just working in the summer or whenever help was needed. And I think so many people in our family at some point worked behind the counter, particularly during the holidays. It was a busy time, and my dad would throw whatever family member behind the counter that he needed, just to get the work done, particularly during the busy times. But yeah, it was very much a hub, and particularly given the location where it was, it very much so became a meeting place. And I think a lot of people would come in, honestly, just to chat with him sometimes. He was definitely a very chatty and social person, so it became a hub.
My job was pumping jelly donuts, and I could take a few jelly donuts. When I left, I suppose you could not take a few pieces of jewelry like that when you left. Tell me about
my job was I was big on cleaning the counters, bottle of Windex or wrapping gifts.
Tell me a little about mom and dad, about what they were like, your relationship to them, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, they were amazing. They were high school sweethearts. They met when they were about 16 years old, and got married when they were 20. And they were just simple, gentle, kind people. My dad was an avid runner, as you can see there. I think he ultimately completed 23 marathons. He used to run New York and Boston every year, and we would make a little family trip out of it. We'd go and cheer him on. Definitely became a very family-oriented event. And my mom, also very serene. She loved yoga. They both practice yoga frequently. It didn't take much to make them happy. They were very content. They were best friends with each other. Just very loving people, very much people, I would say. They got along with everyone, and very social, and just happy and content.
Were they in their early 50s when they passed?
They were each 52, yes.
Each 52.
Mm-hmm.
And did you take after your father and become a runner of some type?
Not to his ability, but I did run cross country in high school and for a little bit in college. I would say my brother has more of the skill when it comes to running. He and I have both run marathons, but he qualified for and completed Boston actually with my dad. So, yeah.
If I ask you any questions that are difficult, feel free to not respond or whatever. But
Sure.
You told me the other day that I could ask what I wanted to ask, and you've been very kind so far. Tell me a little bit about how you found out what happened on that day. And was it February of 2005?
It was February 2nd, 2005. Yeah.
It's almost 20 full years away, almost 20 years ago.
It will be 20 years this coming February. Yes.
So how did you find out?
I was at work. As I mentioned, I had just started. I had just moved to New York City. I was at my first job, which was at an accounting firm in New York City. Our office was right in Times Square. And I just got a series of phone calls saying that there had been a robbery and I needed to get home. But, no one really elaborated on what exactly had happened or the extent of injuries. Didn't even come to my mind at that point, to be honest with you. They just said that there was a robbery and I needed to get back home as fast as I could. And so it was I would say a confusing few hours, getting from New York to Connecticut. Took a car service and ultimately arrived at the hospital, and got the worst news of my life.
Yeah. And what did you find out about what had happened? Not immediately then, but subsequently.
Yeah, I mean, there weren't many details in the immediate aftermath. It was just trying to grasp, that it had happened at all. But in the coming days and later when it went to trial, what we learned was that there was a young man who had a drug addiction, and he fueled that addiction by committing petty crimes. So stealing cars, breaking into homes, and he broke into a home in Greenwich, Connecticut, opened the door to a nightstand, presumably looking for valuables, and instead he found an unsecured gun. My life would be very different if that gun had been locked up. But he took that gun, and a few weeks later, he first robbed a jewelry store in Long Island, and the owner of that jewelry store was killed. And a few weeks later, he came to Fairfield, Connecticut, my parents' store. He came in at closing time and told my dad he was looking to purchase an engagement ring. He then said he wanted to buy a bracelet for his girlfriend, who was about the size of my mom. So could she try on a bracelet? And they were both in the front. And that's when they were both shot. My dad passed away immediately, and my mom attempted to call the police, but she was shot, and she died from her injuries while paramedics were working on her.
I believe you told me, if I recall correctly, that the girlfriend or some lady had cased out the jewelry store a day or two before. Am I correct in that?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. Yes.
And when we get to the issues of what you look to have our society do to protect people to avoid gun violence, one issue I think you talked about with me is safe storage of guns.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And do you want to talk about that issue just a little bit, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we chatted the other day that, there's not one magic piece of legislation that will end this epidemic of gun violence, but it's going to take really people from both sides of the aisle coming together and having realistic common ground conversations, and safe storage, I think, is the most paramount one. Right now there's more guns than there are people in this country, and guns have become the leading cause of death of children in America. And the fact that we have had as little action to combat that as we have, is mind-boggling to me, just as an American, but as a parent, so safe storage is just one of those common sense measures that ensures that guns are not getting into the hands of people who shouldn't have them, whether it be because it's a child or someone who's mentally unstable or, legally not safe to have a gun, because of a past criminal record. There's so many different reasons to safely secure your gun. And at the same time, it's not limiting the gun owner from access to their weapon. There's biometric safes that allow you to access the gun as quickly as you can open the drawer to a nightstand. So it to me, one of those no-brainer solutions that would prevent these catastrophic consequences. It's such a small margin of gun owners that are irresponsible. Most gun owners that I talk to already are practicing safe storage. But it's that very small percentage that has such enormously catastrophic consequences. So, the more that we can talk about and promote safe storage, the safer people will be. Again, it's not the only means to combat gun violence, but it's certainly one that I see as critically important, as it relates to my own parents.
We've only met once and talked a couple of times, but it amazes me how strong you seem to be with dealing with what you have had to deal with. And I think it's very important for those people who are thick or stubborn or worse, who do not support appropriate gun legislation, that using the words reasonableness, I think if they heard more about what you're telling about your parents and your closest and your family, et cetera, people would say, I would hope, would be more realistic in supporting the kinds of legislation that is needed. And that's something I find very frustrating to me, and I'm sure to you. So my question to you is, how have you been able to deal with this terrible tragedy in the best way you have?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of different ways, there's a lot of different elements of it. It's just the adapting. I don't say healing or moving on, because a trauma or loss like this is not something that you ever get over, but you learn to adapt. So I think, taking the measures to adapt to what happened just on a personal level, the loss of my mom and dad at such a young age. But then from the perspective of gun violence prevention, I think getting off the sidelines of, spending time looking around and saying, when are they going to do something? When are they going to do something? And it's like, well, it's on us. We all have to do something. And I think, it's sort of a misconception, or very easy for people to point fingers or blame, when there's a national tragedy. And I think it's important to self-reflect and really ask yourself, well, what have I done? What is my small part? And I think it also looks different for everyone. I think, anyone can pick up a phone and call their legislator. And there's so many different aspects and elements that need to be addressed. And I think it's finding the space in the movement that's best for you. And whether it be as simple as, if there's a parent and you have a child who's going over to a friend's house for a play day, ask them, do you happen to have guns in your house? And if they do, are they secured? Nobody thinks twice about asking questions like that when you send your kid to a house where there's a pool, or if your child has an allergy. I think normalizing that conversation goes a long way. And again, just thinking about different aspects about where you can get involved.
When I was a kid in high school or middle school, there was a quote. I think it was, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And you have been part of the solution. And I'd like Candy Ann to show us some of the pictures, of your involvement politically. That's you and Kamala Harris. Where was that taken?
That's at the White House.
And what was there a particular event that happened?
Yes, that was a few weeks ago. There were some executive orders that were signed, and it was also the 1-year anniversary of the establishment of the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, which is doing great work.
Next, this is President Biden, and who's the lady next? Oh, that's you.
That is me.
Same event?
That previous one was the same event. This was a few summers ago. This was when the bipartisan Safety Act was signed. This is at the White House, and that's my daughter in the middle. So she, I think she was 7 at the time, 6 or 7.
Just for the audience, what's the orange? What are the orange ribbons for?
Orange is the color, the national color for gun violence prevention. It stems from, there was a young woman named Hadiya Pendleton who lost her life to gun violence. And her friends and family started a movement of wearing orange because it's the color that hunters wear to notify people not to shoot. So orange has been adapted as the color of gun violence prevention.
Next, that's Gabby Gifford, who was a congressman from Arizona, I think it was, married to John Kelly, who's now a senator. And she was shot several years ago. And she's doing as well as she can, but it's very sad what happened to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but she is a true hero. She has done so much good work.
This picture is Tara and the person we mentioned, Abby Clements. Where is this same event?
That was down at the White House, yes. I would say Abby is a personal hero and friend of mine, and I tell her both all the time.
I was at Abby's house. Abby was a teacher, or she's taking a year off now. She's a teacher at Sandy Hook on the day of the tragedy in December 2012. And as I understand it, if the shooter had gone one direction versus the other, it would have been her classroom. I did a show with Abby. I don't know if you've seen it, Tara. I did a show with Abby, and Abby told about what happened, and it was a very emotional show.
Mhm.
And it was several years after the event because it was hard for her at that point in time to speak. But
Mhm.
recently, Abby spoke, of course, at the Democratic Convention and was
Yeah.
awesome. It was
Yeah, she
awesome.
was amazing. She was
But,
amazing.
but I was at their house the night before. There was a little gathering. And the next day, I was in the courthouse the day of Sandy Hook. And there was a lot of scurrying around what's going on. And people were saying, well, maybe there was some domestic violence thing, whatever. No one dreamed or
Mm,
nightmared of what happened. And I
yeah.
remember calling Brian, her husband, saying, hey, Brian, does Abby teach at? Yes, Bob, that's the school. And that's just an amazing, sad story. And somehow our government still hasn't done the right thing. Talk to me a little bit about some things you're doing, Tara, to try and help. I understand you're involved in an organization trying to help families who have surviving children.
Mhm.
What is that all about, please?
So about 6 or 7 years ago, I started, stemming from a larger national drive, I started a holiday drive for local children who have been impacted by gun violence, predominantly children who have lost a parent. And for the most part, most of the children are from Bridgeport, which is where I grew up. So every year we connect with families that we have met or worked with through the many phenomenal GVP and mostly grassroots GVP groups in Bridgeport. And we just ask for 3 items that the children need, which tend to be extremely basic, and 3 items that they want. And then I put it all together and create a sign up genius so that people can help and sign up and shop. And the first year we shopped, we had 26 kids we shopped for, and last year we had over 120. And it's one way to just let children who have been impacted by gun violence know that they're not forgotten this holiday season or any holiday season. And from my perspective, I think about them all year. I think to go through such trauma at such a young age, I would do anything I can to help kids who have been impacted.
As I recall, there was a lot of funding presented to Newtown, Connecticut for Sandy Hook for the issue of mental health. And, if someone breaks an arm, you can see the arm's broken, it's in a cast,
Mhm.
but we can't always obviously see inside someone's head. Talk to me a little about the importance of mental health, psychologist, social, whatever it's going to be to
Mhm.
help children, the families, whatever. And that people, if they have that available, should go towards it because I would suspect it's helpful. Any comments about that, please?
Absolutely. I mean, I think mental health is as important as physical health, and particularly in communities that are so largely impacted by gun violence, and can often be overlooked. There's daily violence, and even families that have not been directly impacted. They're living with the common fear or threat of gun violence. So. Yeah.
When you're talking about how we have done so little in our society, despite the efforts of people like you and Abby Clements and Senator Murphy and others in that regard, I was involved in a situation where when I was very young, 1988, I was on the Board of Education in Shelton, and a classmate of mine was the chairman of the Board of Education in Shelton, and her husband was the head of of a certain custodial position of all the custodians in Shelton. And I called up the superintendent's office on August 25th of 1988, and you could tell there was something going on that was terrible. And it came to find out that there was a double murder suicide at Elizabeth Shelton School in Shelton, luckily a few days, if there's any luck, before school started. And my friend, who was the toughest guy I ever met in my life, and it turned his life around with young kids, 3 kids, and he died. At the hands of a murderer. And even though my town of city of Shelton was devastated, and every year August 25th we have a little note amongst friends remembering our friend who used to call the peacemaker. I tell this story because even though I wasn't as directly involved as you, I still think about Darrell Ellis at least once a week or more, and I can only imagine what it is that you go through and your family goes through and your kids go through.
Mhm.
Tell me about your kids. Do they talk about this at all?
I mean, they're young, so it has sort of evolved as they have gotten older. You know, first it was just they knew that their grandparents lived in heaven, and they both now know what happened. But they get involved now. They participate in GV Angels. They each select a child that's the same age as them, and we go shopping so that they understand that you know, there are children who have been impacted, but it's difficult. They wish that they got to know their grandparents. You know, they hear wonderful stories about them, and you know, they're sad to have missed out on having them in their lives. And obviously, I'm tremendously sad about it for, you know, that lost relationship.
By the way, you saw on the screen, I believe, the address to, there it is right now, gvangelct@gmail.com. For those people who want to find out more about what you're doing, I've already told Tara that after the show, I'm going to commit myself to whatever she tells me to do.
Yeah, we need as many shoppers as we can get. You can imagine, you know, 120 children times 3 gifts times, you know, 3 needs, it adds up. So if the email address is up, you know, just send me an email and say you're interested, and we can definitely send you more information. So thank you for sharing that. I can say it absolutely makes a difference. And, you know, when I distribute the gifts, it's so meaningful to see how much it means for the kids. Myself and a good friend of mine, Laura Cable, distribute them, and it just means so much to them. So,
well, I'm committing myself to that. And by the way, you have an open book on that. And by the way, you can ask Abby. Very few people get that from me, so you want to check it out.
Great.
We only have about a minute left. You're welcome. We only have about a minute left. I'd like you to just use that time to say whatever you want to say about the topic of gun violence. And if you want to tell us who you're supporting for president of the United States, that's okay too, because I'm supporting Kamala Harris.
Well, yes, you can see in the picture who I am very, very excitedly supporting. And I think as it pertains to gun violence, I think the biggest message I have is, you know, again, getting off the sidelines and not waiting until it has impacted you directly. I promise you, you don't want to be in the shoes of someone who has been directly impacted if you don't know anyone already. And I think the more we talk about it and the more that we find common sense, middle ground solutions, you know, it doesn't have to be as polarizing as it is. I've had great conversations with people from both sides of the aisle. They're wonderful gun owners that also, you know, want to prevent gun violence. And I think the more that we can have those conversations, the closer we will get to reducing this epidemic, again, that is the #1 killer of children in this country. And I can't think of anything more important than our children.
Tara, I just want to say to you, Tara, I really appreciate you coming on. I'm honored, truly honored that you're on. I hope you'll come back another time. Maybe I'll have you and Abby together. But I thank you sincerely. Thank you so very much for what you do. I wish you the best. This has been Bob Potzner on the Bobby O Show, and it's very sad, but you're uplifting hearing you talk. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.